the you were talking about it before coming to live, Zohran Mamdani.
Mm,
What is in his argument, in his sort of view, in his sort of vision that resonates with the people, which lacks when it comes to the policies of the Democratic Party? The Democratic Party has decided not to support him later on. Right now they're supporting him. They're saying that he's the candidate for the Democratic Party. What is different in his sort of argument? And because that could help their party, you
right.
know, to somehow to think about it in the next presidential election, for example.
Well, Mandami goes against, or at least in his what he says he's going to do. And we'll see. And I think a
Mm,
lot of people are wary of him. Those of us on the left are wary of him because of our experiences with Obama, with
yeah.
AOC, with Sanders, right? So we all have a degree of skepticism that we're watching him with, but we are
Which is
excited,
logic.
which
Which
is
is
logical and fully. We'd
yeah.
be foolish otherwise, I
Uh,
mean, so I think with his candidacy, though, what's touching people is his clear articulation of the unfairness of the system, his ability to articulate the wealth inequality, the haves and the have-nots, and the remedies to that, and his unabashed desire to rectify it. That's what comes across to people. That this is a guy who really does believe a transformative way for our society, and in his case, in New York City, is to do things like provide people with childcare, to do things with make the cost of transportation, public transportation, zero at its usage, right? The idea being taking overhead away from people so that they're not drowning with just the costs of living that are involuntary. He's big emphasis on housing in New York City. His predecessors, Eric Adams, Michael Bloomberg, they all allowed the rents to go up in New York. De Blasio, I believe, was able to a couple times freeze it, but certainly his most, as the corporate media in the United States would describe, the most successful New York mayor. They may say, Michael Bloomberg. They don't talk about that, his relationship with business, his relationship with the landlords, and so Mandami fundamentally aligning themselves with the working class and the middle class. And this is something I think that Mandami is smart about in his articulation, his explanation of his policies. He's not specifically aligning with just the working class or with the middle class. When I hear him speak in a way that conflates both. Because although living paycheck to paycheck on $30,000 a year is a lot worse than living paycheck to paycheck on $100,000 or $150,000 a year. And I know we're talking about New York City, so it's even higher than that. It's still living paycheck to paycheck. And so a lot of the anxieties, the frustrations, the fears, the anger of the working class is replicated in the middle class. Now, essentially, again, there are differences, of course, but when you look at what the fundamental problems are, it's that the overhead costs for Americans, for American families, just to live, just to get to their jobs, to provide for their children, things that we could take on as a whole, things that we could provide collectively. So whether that's childcare, public transportation, you get into issues with say healthcare and education, all these things that are necessary for us. No one can deny that people have to get to work. No one can deny that if you want to work, you have to have someone to watch your children. No one can deny that healthcare costs in the United States are ruinous. They are exorbitant. They are the product of a failed and immoral and criminal healthcare system that has a few winners and many, many losers. And so, looking at all that and the way Mandami comes across his uh, his character, his looks, his brightness, his humor. And he is able to portray himself as an outsider, just like Obama did, just as Donald Trump did. And, so maybe after those, we all should just be shutting up and not saying anything. But I think there is this realization that things are so bad in the US in terms of where they are going, in terms of where we've been, where the trends are going. I just read a book from the late 1990s by Michael Parenti, who's a leftist author, and I'd never read this particular book of his. And the things he's talking about in that book, particularly wealth inequality, 25, 30 years ago when he wrote it, his arguments seem quaint now. I mean, things have exasperated, things have developed and worsened so greatly over the last nearly 2 generations that what we thought the problems were in the 90s are nothing compared to where we are now in terms of all of these fundamental realities of life for working class and middle class families. And so I think that's what gets people excited about Mandami, and his willingness to as well have courage, have guts to not be a politician. I don't want to end this without saying that the fact that he stood there on that primary debate stage with what 10 other Democratic politicians, and all of them, as soon as the question was asked, where are you going to first as New York mayor? All of them, Israel. And Mandami says, I'm not going anywhere. I'm the mayor of New York. I'm not the mayor of Tel Aviv, or, whatever his comment was. And people resonated with that. People got that. People understood it. And they liked the fact that he had the guts to say it. So I think you take his siding with the working in the middle class, his articulation of the issues they face, his remedies for that, coupled with his guts. When they said to him, do you believe Israel has a right to exist? And he says it doesn't have a right to exist in an apartheid state. I mean, exactly. Who is arguing against that? Who is articulating it better than that? And case in point, he goes on in the Democratic primary to win the bulk of the Jewish Democratic voters in that primary. So I think, summarizing all that, you have an understanding why people are excited about Mandami, and it looks like he is on his way to win big in New York City. We'll caveat that, we'll asterisk that with, of course, the notion that anything can happen, and he's making a lot of people very upset about this. So if some Deus Ex Machina event happens in the next week or so that changes the results of the election, I don't think a lot of us would be surprised. But it certainly, aside from that, looks like he'll be the next mayor of New York City.
Yeah. Since you've mentioned Barack Obama, Matt, he has been to the United Kingdom in the last 2 months, 3 months, 3 times. And he's talking about, Matt, the new form of journalism with government regulatory constraints. I was wondering how far he came since
since he was a constitutional law professor. Yeah,
exactly. He was amazing in those days. I remember he was talking, and looking at Barack Obama today, it seems to me the whole concept of neocons coming out, neoliberals. Here is what he said, Matt. I want to know your take on what he said, because it's related to what you and me we are doing here.
Have to do is to start experimenting with new forms of journalism and how do we use social media in ways that reaffirm facts, separate facts from opinion. We want diversity of opinion. We don't want diversity of facts. That, I think, is one of the big tasks of social media. By the way, it will require some government, I believe, some government regulatory constraints around some of these business models in a way that's consistent with the First Amendment, but that also says, look, there is a difference between these platforms versus a business model that elevates the most hateful voices or the most polarizing voices or the most dangerous in the sense of inciting violence voices. And And that I think is going to be a big challenge for all of us that we're going to have to undertake.
You know, some parts of what he's saying is beautiful. The other part is dangerously, frightening. And how because when you say the facts, who's going to define what would be the facts?
That's
This is the
exactly
problem.
yeah. That's exactly it, Nima. That's exactly that. That's the whole case right there. That's the whole point right there. You listen to his words, and just because of a book I'm reading right now about John Brown, I think that under Barack Obama's definitions right there about those who are most polarizing or having a diversity of facts, or who are likely to somehow incite violence. Well, by that measure, in the first half of the 19th century, you would have had to censor the abolitionist movement in the United States. And we could find how many other examples of that. This idea of to your point, is who's establishing the facts. The way he even says that, reaffirm facts as if they already exist in some narrative, in some dictionary, in some correct form, of which there is a repository that's controlled and guarded and managed by the government. Essentially is what you're going to have to. And you have to, the Democrats and the Republicans are terrible in this as well. But, under Barack Obama's presidency, you saw very severe and chilling effects on journalism. Edward Snowden's revelations about the wholesale surveillance and spying on the American public by the American government, to which the Obama administration essentially doubled down on, chased Snowden into exile, and then persecuted more whistleblowers than any previous presidential administration. But the chilling effect that it had on journalists, on the media, this idea that the government will be in my computer whether I like it or not, and so I better toe the line. There's been public opinion surveys or studies done that show that had a chilling effect. PEN America, no, excuse me, PEN International, the great literary organization, did a study that affirmed exactly that, showed that journalists were self-censoring. Journalists have been chilled by the understanding, the reality of the U.S. government spying program. And then PEN America, of course, went and gave Barack Obama an award for his support of the First Amendment, even as PEN International just published that study. So, the reality is, though, what he says, regardless of how people in institutions affirm their commitment to the First Amendment, to free speech, to a free press, they're going to throw that up. They're going to throw it away. They're going to jettison it if they feel that they can somehow be made better by abandoning those principles. And so the idea that newspapers, legacy media outlets are going to fight against any such thing is not true. I mean, we've seen that. We certainly saw that the case with Julian Assange. It's only when their board of directors feel threatened that they will do something. Now they will do things like walk out of the Pentagon, the major legacy media, in a spectacle in a theater, act like a theater, which, that's a whole other thing we can get into about how stupid the Hegseth Pentagon was for pulling that nonsense with the media when they already had a loyal Pentagon press corps who was essentially once every blue moon going to do something the Pentagon didn't like, and all the other days they were going to file their reports just that the Pentagon would want them to. To get back to what you're saying with Obama, this is incredibly dangerous because it is, and this is the danger of AI. And we're already seeing this when, you type something in and ask your favorite AI bot or platform, the information it provides you, that information all fits within the guardrails of the developers. And so as we see who these developers are, as these AI platforms become more solidified, become more authoritative, then it becomes more important of who are the people who are telling the AI what's correct, who are people who are telling AI what the facts are, what opinions are too polarizing. So Barack Obama, I think, was trying to be principled. I think he was trying to be futuristic or forward looking. I think, of course, he was being partisan by trying to, imply that the dangers all come from the right wing on this. But the reality is, when you pull apart what he said, there's a very, very real ominous danger there in the idea of a government slash oligarchic control of the media that's always existed, but will only get worse.